In 2012, the first election I could ever vote in, I voted for Mitt Romney. In 2016, I supported Donald Trump. In 2018, I wanted America to be a white nation. And in 2024, I was genuinely excited to vote for Joe Biden for a second time. My political journey is one that I think not many people have been on. So I figured I'd share my story because every single take that I have seen on social media these past 2 weeks does not resonate with me or my experience at all. Also, to be cute, I made this little board so we can track my political journey together. For those who don't know, this is the political compass, where the y-axis is authoritarian to libertarian, and the x-axis is left to right. Normally economic, but for this we'll do social. I started my political journey somewhat conservative. Let's say here. I was raised Catholic and actually went to church every Sunday. Raised as such, around 13, I opposed abortion and gay marriage. Growing up in the 90s, I was also a huge nerd. I read every fantasy book I could get my hands on, Seventh Tower, Del Toro series, and Redwall because Mouse Jesus, as well as sci-fi novels like Artemis Fowl and the like. I was also really into video games, though I only had a couple of them. The game I played the most, and to this day my favorite game, is a JRPG called Radiata Stories, which I almost guarantee none of you have heard of. So here's where we start. I really only care about 2 issues, and my hobbies are fantasy and escapism. My high school was fairly political, and I'd have a lot of arguments with my classmates. My friend group was fairly liberal, but none of them really seemed to have a problem with my more conservative ideas. Back in my hometown, I'd actually been a theater kid. Not to brag or anything, but I'd been the lead in my middle school musical twice. I continued my theatrical pursuits in high school, and in a twist anyone could have seen coming, I ended up hanging out with quite a lot of gay and queer kids. I saw the relationships they'd form, and they didn't really feel any different from the relationships I saw straight kids forming around the same time. That, coupled with becoming friends with them, shifted my politics a bit. Although I'm fairly certain there was a period where I was in the civil unions are okay but not gay marriage phase, and I can't remember if that ended in high school or college, but somewhere in that area. High school was also my first interaction with a trans person. One of my friends, who I had assumed was just a cis lesbian, told me at one point that they were actually a man. The really funny thing is, though, I totally accepted this and moved on. I think I even said something like, "Oh, well, that makes sense. You know, there are male brains and female brains, so it would make sense that you could have been born with a male brain in a female body." In the modern context, it's kind of funny to think of a person being opposed to gay marriage but accepting of trans people. But the truth is, I had just never been exposed to the concept. So when I first met someone who was trans, I really had no reason to object to it. In 2008, I supported John McCain for president, though obviously I was too young to vote. I supported him because of his plan to build nuclear reactors, and I supported that because I understood the economic implications, and not just because I thought a lot of nuclear reactors sounded cool. When Obama won, I was disappointed, but I took it in stride as best I could, and life went on. It was in high school I also got really online in a way that I hadn't before. In fact, the B-board on 4chan, got really big at my school. As a result, me and my friends developed a fairly dark and edgy sense of humor, although, to be fair, it was mostly just this meme. My identification with the label nerd also really solidified around this time. My friends and I would get together for LANs of Dota, Counter-Strike, and even Halo, games which to this day I am completely trash at. But it was really nice to find a community of nerds who liked the same stuff I did. By the time I graduated high school, I had changed quite a bit politically. I was maybe here around that time. Still fairly conservative on a lot of issues, but a bit more libertarian. Being interested in theater and film as well at this point, I decided to go to Los Angeles for college. Also because I really seemed to love blue states for some reason. And this was around when the Occupy Wall Street movement was popping off. For those who don't know, the Occupy Wall Street was a movement of people who were upset that the banks had never really been punished for the 2008 financial crisis, instead getting a famous bailout. I vaguely knew the economy had tanked right when I entered high school, but I was in high school. I didn't really care about the economy, so I never really looked into it. Even though Occupy was undoubtedly a left-wing movement, it didn't really drag me to the left per se. If anything, it just made me less trustful of institutions, something which to be fair, I was kind of already leaning towards. Regardless, college started and I made a bunch of new friends, even got into my first real relationship around this time. With a thriving social life, I found myself online less and less. And most of my friends weren't on the scary anonymous image board, so I got into Reddit. I kept up my trend of arguing politics with my friends, as most of them again were quite liberal. In 2012, when Obama was up for re-election, I supported Mitt Romney. Interestingly, I supported Mitt Romney because of his healthcare plan. Because as governor of Massachusetts, he instituted this thing called Romney Care. I'm fairly certain my girlfriend supported Obama, but we watched the election results come in together, and even though Romney lost, we were able to still, have a civil discussion and be okay with each other. End of sophomore year, I'm like, here, maybe. Not really much movement, mostly just a little bit more libertarian. That summer, my girlfriend and I broke up. This was rough for a number of reasons, but to be fair, it had been my idea. That, combined with my naturally argumentative nature, meant that my friends started to sour on me. Eventually it got so bad, I didn't feel comfortable in my own dorm room, which I shared with 2 of them at the time. As I was not interacting with people as much, I ended up spending more and more time online. And then GamerGate happened. This is an important part of my story, but if you've basically just heard too much about GamerGate and you're sick of it, feel free to skip to here. For everyone else, let me set the stage, but with a caveat. The version of GamerGate that I'm about to present to you is the version that I believed at the time. Since then, I have changed my view on what happened, but for the story I'm telling, my version of events is much more important than reality. GamerGate, as I understood it, was about a woman named Zoe Quinn who had released a video game called Depression Quest. This was a fairly bad game, but it received pretty good reviews, which wasn't super weird at the time because gaming journalism was already something of a joke at this point. However, chat logs were leaked by her ex-boyfriend where she admitted to sleeping with 5 other guys, some of them while she was still with her ex, and one of them had reviewed Depression Quest. This is what I thought at the time. And I wasn't even actually mad at Zoe Quinn. I was actually mad at the guy who supposedly reviewed her game, Nathan Grayson. This culminated in many posts attacking Zoe, attacking Nathan, attacking pretty much anyone involved in the story. However, the interesting part is I didn't actually care at this point. Because again, to me and many others, gaming journalism was dead. There was really no point in it anyway. But then threads started getting pruned and comments started getting deleted. Mods even posting about how talking about GamerGate wasn't allowed. This happened even on 4chan of all places, on V, blue board indeed. Very quickly for me, this became an issue of censorship. Why was 4chan, this bastion of free speech and libertarianism of all places, not allowing people to talk about a current event? In addition, you'd have people like Anita Sarkeesian going on shows like The Colbert Report, at the time one of my favorite shows, and talking about how actually we were all just a bunch of angry gamer guys who wanted women out of our space.
Why do you think women are being threatened in this exchange?
I think women are perceived as threatening because we are asking for games to be more inclusive. We're asking for games to acknowledge that we exist and that we love games.
Why not just have a separate game? Have separate but equal games.
This is a community I'd basically been a part of my whole life, and a community I'd suffered to be a part of. I was a gamer when it wasn't cool to be a gamer, when you got made fun of for it. And to then be told that I'm making this space worse, that I'm keeping women out of this space, naturally, I just really started to hate the people telling me that. This is one of the first times I started to feel genuinely crazy, because I felt as though I had very legitimate concerns, but was told that I was sexist for even voicing those concerns, which, again, were concerns against men, not women. And this started to bleed out into my real life, too. I remember having a conversation with one of my teachers in college from a media studies course, which was basically like, let's watch a film and let's analyze it, but not from like a filmmaking perspective, from like a cultural perspective. And we were watching Kill Bill Volume 1, at the time one of my favorite films. And we were specifically analyzing the end of the movie. And my teacher made the claim that the end of this movie was racist and enforced imperialist ideas because the white woman triumphed in the samurai sword fight over the Asian woman, and the Asian woman even says something like, you bested me or something like that. I raised my hand and point out that the Asian character, played by Lucy Liu, is very explicitly supposed to be half Chinese, half American. And she just said to me, well, you know, she's Asian, so she's closer than the white woman. And any Western audience watching this scene is going to have her interpretation and not mine. And I don't think I could think of a response, and I think the conversation just continued. I can't really remember what happened after that, but instances like that became more and more common, and I so often would be like just in my head about what I was doing. So naturally, just to feel like a shred of sanity, I began to turn to spaces that did talk about this kind of stuff. Around this time, I think I was watching a lot of like Sargon of Akkad and Internet Aristocrat, who's now known as Mr. Medicare. And these people were talking about GamerGate in a way that resonated with my understanding of what was going on in the world at the time. Sargon of Akkad was interesting because he was from the UK. And so as time went on, he started talking about this wave of migrants that were coming into Europe and sort of destroying European culture, which also got me into watching people like Lauren Southern, who famously also was opposed to some of the migration coming into Europe at the time. So now I've graduated college and I'm, let's say around here. I still think of myself as libertarian, but with my thoughts on immigration and feminism, I've certainly shifted a bit more to the right. Over the course of senior year, I'd been able to get an internship at Machinima, at the time, internet nerd mecca. I also reconnected with some people that I had known throughout college, but hadn't been part of that kind of core friend group. And I ended up kind of getting welcomed into their friend group, so hey, I had friends again. With my bills taken care of and a bunch of friends, again, I wasn't spending so much time on the internet. As I still loved talking politics, I'd talk it with them all the time. But this time, the result was I actually started to shift a bit more to the left, or at least the center. One of them actually convinced me to start supporting unions, something I've been quite opposed to up until that time, by pointing out that the concept of collective bargaining was actually fairly important when you're talking about balancing power structures, appealing to my more libertarian nature. Because of my experience in high school, I'd also never stopped supporting trans rights. And I honestly think that that specific opinion is what allowed so many of my much more liberal friends to sort of look past a lot of my other politics, because to their mind, at least, I supported this one position that they considered extremely important. So honestly, a pretty big shift. I think right now is probably around here, let's say. Remember, these are all just kind of approximations anyway. In the 2016 presidential primaries, my friends all went for Bernie Sanders, and I did as well. Especially when I heard about him talking about breaking up the banks, it was like I was suddenly back in 2011, you know? Occupy would not die. When he finally conceded to Hillary Clinton, my friends and I were heartbroken. You know, we had really thought this man was about to bring about a revolution, but at the end of the day, we all just resigned ourselves that, you know, we had to vote for her because the Republican nominee more and more was looking like it was going to be Donald Trump. Remember, up to this point, I actually had very few political convictions. At this point, all that was really left was supporting gay marriage, being against abortion, being against censorship, and being anti-establishment. Trump also talked about a big, beautiful border wall, and I began to think back to what I had learned about immigration when I was listening to Sargon of Akkad. It had already destroyed Europe, and I really didn't want it to destroy America either, so even this policy sounded pretty good to me. Throw in congressional term limits, slashing government spending, frankly, slashing the government as a whole. Anti-establishment me was liking Trump more and more. By the time the first presidential debate rolled around, I was pretty sure I was going to be voting for the guy. And soon enough, I was arguing with my friends and my family, and frankly, anyone who would argue with me about Donald Trump. And everyone kind of started giving me the side eye. To everyone around me, I was suddenly incredibly far right, but I knew I wasn't. I was a centrist, if not a little bit to the left. And all this hate and censorship was being directed at me for supporting a guy who, in my mind, was closer to Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton. One of my friends, my ex-roommate actually, worked with me at the time. I can still recall how shocked he was when he found out I supported Trump. And as he told the rest of my old friend group, slowly they started to distance themselves from me. And then Trump won. When returns came in, I was still at work, and everyone around me at work was obviously quite upset, and I sort of was having to hide my power level. But I was getting texts from friends trying to be like, oh, tell me this won't be as bad. I even had a girl I'd been seeing the long distance reach back out to try and reconnect with me. I it feels bad because now I'm on the other side, and especially in 2024, I now sympathize with the people who are heartbroken because now I feel like I know what that feels like a little more. But unless you were a Trump supporter, man, you just cannot imagine how magical that night was. I still to this day will go back and look up the Dame Pesos election meltdown video or the the year 4chan won or stuff like that, just to like relive a taste of just how magical that night was. You can't understand what it was like to have so many people calling you crazy for years and years, and suddenly it feels like you were right the whole time. But barely a week after he was elected, I had lost basically every friend that I'd had. And the feeling of being ignored didn't go away, even with my candidate in office. But it was so much worse this time because I had literally no one to talk to about it outside of my family. And even they weren't my biggest fans at this point. It felt nefarious. It felt nefarious. It was like every issue that I cared about, whether it was GamerGate or Occupy or Trump, just the media itself as a machine would try and quash these issues that I cared so much about. Anytime I cared about anything, I would be made to feel crazy, even though Trump had shown me that I wasn't always crazy. And it got in my head so much that by 2018, I didn't even support Trump because I wanted America to be a white nation. Let's look at how I got here. I had already been consuming content like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and Comrade Pool. And around this time, that coupled with a lot of the conversations going on in the real world, made me feel like masculinity, and specifically white masculinity, was kind of under attack or trying to be suppressed in some form. I felt like white men were the villain in everyone's story, like I was the villain in everyone's story. Remember the "it's okay to be white" thing? This was an overwhelming success for the right-wingers because the point of this was to get these signs taken down. The point was to claim that the reason the signs were taken down is because there was no subtext here. There was no threat, implicit or otherwise. It was that the thing people were against was whiteness itself as a concept. Something that really endeared right-wing spaces to me was the comedy, something that's still a very potent weapon of right-wing propaganda. The OK symbol is a Nazi sign? Well, I guess AOC must be a Nazi then. I remember there were all these funny memes, like one was about like standing up to the man, and it basically was just, saying, oh, Israel's not legitimate. And there was this one meme I really remember about like wooden doors at Auschwitz. What? So the wooden doors meme is Holocaust denial. The claim is that there are wooden doors to the gas chambers that you can find at Auschwitz, as obviously wood, is not airtight. This doesn't make any sense, and therefore these gas chambers must not have actually been gas chambers, but regular showers. Nowadays, if you Google this, you will find a billion things debunking it, but one of the nasty things about conspiracy theories is they're always 2 steps ahead of you. And as a result, when I was Googling this stuff, there was nothing out there except Nazis pushing their propaganda. I ended up looking up other stuff, and by the end of it all, I had some really serious questions about World War II. I had actually gone so extreme that not only was I anti-Trump, I was genuinely depressed because this might be the best we'd ever get. Things just started to feel hopeless. It felt like all the problems I saw in the world, me, my race, my culture, were just going to be destroyed, and I couldn't do anything about it. I've seen a lot of videos talking about stuff like this. I've never seen a video from someone who's gone as far as I have, which is why I really wanted to share my story, because this was my lowest point. This is literally the worst I had ever been in my entire life, bar none. And what I want to talk about now is how I found my way back. To reiterate, started conservative, then supported Bernie, then supported Trump, and now wanted the ghost of Hitler to come back and take over America. Good? Good. The first person to really get me back into a more sane place of mind is my aunt, who I owe a lot to. She had continued to talk to me during this entire time period, even debating with me about stuff, including certain events during World War II. My conversations with my aunt continued mostly because I felt like she could actually listen to me. She could actually hear what I was saying and respond to me in ways that, to me at least, indicated that she understood what I was saying. And I remember I was having an argument with her about how 6 million seemed a little too high. It was probably closer to 200,000, and I very specifically mentioned the wooden doors. While at first she just sort of stumbled around saying things like, why does this even matter? And then, if there is a number, why does it matter how big the number was? And finally she asked me, where did you read about this? And I remember going online after our conversation, obviously, to look this stuff up so that the next time I talked to her, I would have it all laid out for her in plain black and white. And I couldn't actually find the website I'd found the first time. And when I kept digging, I found someone who showed me how absolutely wrong I was. So I started doing more research and found out that actually wooden doors had been proposed by people who were working for the company that was making Zyklon B around this time. And suddenly I realized everything I had thrown away my friends for, everything I had espoused, everything I had basically ruined my entire life over was just a lie. And that really sucked. This period of my life was actually worse than when I was a Nazi, because when I was a Nazi, at least I had a community. I had people I could talk to. Now I straight up had no one. Like, imagine going back to your friends and saying, hey, sorry, no, I was a Nazi, totally not a Nazi anymore. Let's be friends again. None of them wanted to see me again. I started, of course, being attacked by the very people that I used to felt I belonged with. And suddenly I realized there was a lot less love in this community than I had thought there was. And once I realized all of this had been a lie, I started wondering what else I believed might have been a lie. And it turns out it was a lot. So I started doing my own research. In the end, I ended up tearing down basically every single one of my beliefs and building up my entire worldview from scratch. I realized that some institutions were actually good and even necessary for society to function. I realized that 2008, while it wasn't entirely the fault of the banks, more importantly, breaking them up wouldn't really have addressed the underlying issues that caused that crisis. My views on immigration changed as I realized that their contribution to the economy was a lot greater than I thought. And I even started thinking of immigration as an economic market in and of itself, people sorting themselves into the areas where they could find the greatest amount of opportunity. And lastly, for race and women, well, here's a photo of my wedding day. So I'll let you figure out how that one went. Just to be clear though, this was not a quick process. It probably wasn't until the end of 2019 that I really was in a more kind of central place. And by 2020, sure enough, I was riding with Biden. And that's basically the end of my political journey. I'm essentially here to this day, although my friends describe me as a centrist by average of extremes, as opposed to anyone who actually has centrist positions. But let's now talk about what I believe the left can do to help men who are in the position I was in just a few years ago.
Firstly, let's acknowledge something. My path out of the far right is not one we can expect most people to follow. It involved a lot of me doing my own research, and people just genuinely don't seem to like to do that. Looking back, most of my more radical positions weren't things I reasoned or researched my way into. They were usually just the positions of a community I was a part of that I had joined because they were talking about a completely unrelated issue that I cared about. Even when I drifted a little more to the left, it was because of the conversations I was having with my friends or the community I was a part of. And therein lies both a problem and a path forward. The problem is that you're fighting against the inertia of communal conditioning. But the path forward is that most of these communities are online these days, which means there are fantastic avenues to reach out to men, both before and during radicalization. Though I didn't talk about it as much, my incel phase was brought about by the very real issues I, as a man, faced when I was dating. Like, here's a great example. There's a fear in a lot of these communities of men who have never had sex that if they're ever alone with a woman, she'll try to ruin his life by falsely me-tooing him.
From what I read on the internet, I read that it's unsafe to even be in the same room as like a woman without a third party.
I think a lot of times this purely gets chalked up to a hyperfixation on a small number of instances. But in my opinion, there's actually a deeper underlying concern there, and it's one men don't get to talk about a lot. Namely, that it's really hard to be the pursuer in romantic situations. It's difficult to know things like when should you approach someone and when shouldn't you? How can you show interest without seeming desperate? And how do you take the initiative without making them feel pressure? Men do need spaces to talk about these kind of issues. And as much as you might say, oh, well, men already have spaces, in my experience, they don't. And if they already did, how did Andrew Tate explode in popularity? Remember, the main thing the guy sells to young men is how to get women. And it's not helpful when people say, oh, don't go to, the red pill space. They're bad. They'll teach you bad habits. And then you say, oh, okay, good to know. I won't go there. So where should I go? And everyone's just like, just be yourself, bro. Men will just find other spaces where they can have those conversations. And some of those spaces will have underlying agendas. A large part of my journey towards radicalization was uncritically accepting misinformation. And I think, in general, pushing back against misinformation is good, but you're always going to be one step behind them. Now, personally, I think this is just people getting used to the internet. Anytime any new mode of communication comes out, misinformation spreads with it as a result. Encouraging critical thinking, trying to get people to interface with the internet as a not necessarily trustworthy medium, these kinds of things will come with time as people get more used to it. But a much larger part of that is building spaces that are comfortable with engaging in these kinds of conversations, even when your conversation partner is someone you might personally find deplorable. I know there's a lot of people on the left who say, they hate engaging with the right, it's very tiring, they hate, combating all the misinformation. But the problem is people on the right do not have similar qualms about engaging with the left. One thing of caution, though, is I think these spaces have to not be political, at least at first. I've seen a lot of people say stuff like, we need a Joe Rogan of the left, and frankly, I tend to agree with this. But then they just keep suggesting people like political streamers, when, in my opinion, Joe Rogan's fans don't see his show as like inherently a political space. In fact, the vast majority of his guests are just comedians that he just talks about, whatever's going on. I personally first really got into Joe Rogan when he was interviewing some of those people who were criticized by people I perceived as like, the radical leftists, the postmodern neo-Marxists that are controlling the universities, like that kind of thing. No, I can do it better. I can do it better, Jordan Peterson. Hold on, I can do it better. It's not right. He gave a platform to talk about something which I was curious about and wanted that kind of perspective on, and that no one else was talking about at that kind of time. And then, because I'd kind of already bought into him as a result of that, I stuck around. But again, I didn't start listening to Joe Rogan because I liked his politics. I started listening to Joe Rogan because he had an interesting space. There's nothing inherently wrong with labeling spaces as political. Just know that they're never going to be gateways. They're never going to help people genuinely shift their positions, unless they're interacting with another political space that already exists. But the problem in that case is you really have to know not just your own side's arguments, but the other side's arguments really, really well. Some of my most successful interactions that I've had with people online started with me engaging with people who had a different opinion than me. I was able to speak with a language and in a manner that let them know that I heard them and that I understood where they were coming from. And in some of those cases, I was able to convince people to come over to my side. Well, a little bit, and maybe I'm just flattering myself. I don't know. Sound off in the comments if you hate me. So the takeaway here from a former white nationalist turned, I don't know, liberal now, I guess? I don't know. The internet labels politics really weird. If you ask like a leftist, I'm probably like center right. And if you ask someone on the center right, I'm probably far left. So I don't know. I have a lot of weird positions from both ends of the political spectrum. And anyway, for the average person, we just need more spaces where people can come and hang out. And for the people who've already started to go down the path towards radicalization a little bit, we need people who can interact with those spaces. Trying to get everyone on your side is a futile endeavor. And frankly, in a political context, opposition is a very positive thing, but not all is lost. If you can take away anything from my story, take away this. Things can always get better. Thanks for watching. Different from my other 3 videos. I just woke up day after election and said, oh, I got to make this video now. But I am still working on the Christian syncretism video. It's exploded into a much bigger thing. Now it's like the entire history of Roman theology from 800 to 1000 BC to 500 AD. So it's going to be multiple videos. It's just going to take a long time, but it is coming out. I am still working on it, I promise. That being said, let me know if you like this. These videos are obviously quite a bit easier for me to make and crank out. And if my story can tell you anything, I care deeply about this kind of stuff. But yes, more history content is coming soon. Thanks for watching. I don't know how to end YouTube videos. I feel weird because I'm just standing in front of a green screen, staring at my phone. The end.